The sound of a $3,000 bottle of vintage wine shattering against a marble floor is louder than a gunshot in a silent room. In Chicago's most exclusive restaurant, nobody dared to breathe. They watched in terrified silence as Dante Rossi, the volatile heir to the city's most feared crime family, tore the place apart with his bare hands. He was a hurricane of rage, untouchable and lethal. But just as he raised a heavy chair to smash the main window, a small trembling hand didn't call the police, it reached out to him. One waitress, invisible to the world, walked into the eye of the storm. She didn't know that her silence would scream louder than his anger, or that saving his hand would eventually cost her everything she thought she knew. This is the story of how a wrecked man found a woman who refused to break. The Obsidian Room was not merely a restaurant, it was a cathedral of capitalism located in the heart of the Gold Coast. It was the kind of place where the lighting was always dim. The velvet banquettes were a deep blood red, and the menu didn't list prices because, if you had to ask, you were in the wrong zip code. It was a place where senators dined with tech moguls, and where secrets were traded over plates of Wagyu beef flown in daily from Japan. On this particular Tuesday, however, the Obsidian Room was a war zone. I said, Dante Rossi growled, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. This wine tastes like vinegar, and I don't pay for vinegar. Marcus, the floor manager, was a man who prided himself on his composure. He wore Italian suits that cost more than his staff's cars, and possessed a sneer that could wither a salad. But right now Marcus was sweating through his Egyptian cotton shirt. He was shaking. "Mr. Rossi," Marcus stammered, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "That is a 1982 Chateau Margaux. It has been decanted for exactly 45 minutes. I assure you, you assure me." Dante stood up. The movement was abrupt, violent. The heavy oak chair scraped against the floor with a screech that made the nearby diners flinch. Dante Rossi was 6'3", of coiled muscle and suppressed trauma, dressed in a black, bespoke suit that struggled to contain the width of his shoulders. His eyes, usually a cold, calculating grey, were currently burning with a chaotic fire. He wasn't just angry, he was unhinged. Dante swept his arm across the table. Crash. Crystal stemware, fine china, and silver cutlery flew through the air, shattering against the imported Italian tile. The dining room gasped as one. A woman at the next table screamed and clutched her pearls. "The service here," Dante announced to the terrified room, kicking the table over with a deafening thud, "is dead, just like this place." He picked up the bottle of wine, the remaining half of the 1982 vintage, and hurled it at the wall behind the bar. It exploded, spraying crimson liquid over the backlit display of rare spirits. "Get out!" Dante roared at the patrons. "Everyone get the hell out!" Panic ensued. Socialites and CEOs scrambled for the exit, abandoning their half-eaten risottos and designer clutches. Security guards stood frozen near the entrance. They knew who Dante was. They knew his father, Vittorio Rossi, effectively owned half the police force in Chicago. Touching Dante Rossi was a death sentence. Within 2 minutes, the restaurant was empty, save for the cowering staff, huddled near the kitchen doors, and Dante, who stood in the center of the wreckage, breathing heavily. His chest heaved. His knuckles were split open, blood dripping from his right hand, where he had clipped the edge of a broken plate during his rampage. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the silence of a bomb having just gone off. Dante looked at his bleeding hand, his expression unreadable. He felt nothing. The pain in his hand was a dull throb compared to the screaming void inside his chest. It had been exactly 1 year today. 1 year since the car accident. 1 year since his mother died in the passenger seat while he was driving. The rage wasn't about the wine. It was never about the wine. "Clean this up," Dante whispered, his voice cracking slightly. He turned to leave, feeling the familiar wave of self-loathing crash over him. "Sir," the voice was soft, barely a whisper. Dante whipped around, his eyes narrowing. He expected to see Marcus, or perhaps one of the braver busboys. Instead, he looked down. Standing 5 feet away was a waitress he hadn't even noticed before. She was small, with hair the color of roasted coffee beans, pulled back into a severe, messy bun. Her uniform was too big for her thin frame, the black apron tied tightly around a waist that looked like it could snap. She held a clean, white linen napkin in her hands. She wasn't looking at his face. She wasn't looking at the destruction he had caused. She was looking at his hand. "What do you want?" Dante snarled, taking a step toward her to intimidate her. "Do you want to die, sweetheart? Get back in the kitchen." The girl didn't flinch. She stepped forward. "You're bleeding, sir," she said. Her voice was steady, contrasting the chaos around them. "If you walk out into the cold air with that open wound, it will sting, and you'll ruin the upholstery of your car." Dante blinked. The absurdity of the statement caught him off guard. He had just caused $50,000 in property damage, and she was worried about his car seats. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave. "Elena," she said. She didn't offer a surname. She took another step, entering his personal space. The scent of her hit him vanilla and something sterile, like rubbing alcohol. She reached out and took his large, battered hand in her small, rough ones. Her skin was calloused, the hands of someone who worked 2 jobs. Dante tensed. His instinct was to pull away, to lash out. Violence was the only language he had spoken for 12 months. But her touch was incredibly gentle. She didn't shake. She carefully wrapped the linen napkin around his knuckles, applying pressure to the deepest cut with a professional efficiency. "It needs stitches," Elena murmured, her eyes finally lifting to meet his. Dante felt the air leave his lungs. Her eyes were green, not a bright emerald green, but the dark, mossy green of a forest floor after a storm. They were tired eyes that had seen too much. "I don't do hospitals," Dante said, though the aggression had leaked out of his voice. "I know," Elena said. She tied the knot on the makeshift bandage. "Hold it elevated above your heart for 10 minutes. It will stop the throbbing." She let go of his hand and stepped back, clasping her hands behind her back in a deferential pose. "Is there anything else, sir? Or shall I begin clearing the glass?" Dante stared at her. He looked around the room. Marcus was peeking out from behind the bar, looking like he was about to faint. The other servers were terrified. But this girl, this Elena, was already bending down, picking up shards of the broken wine bottle with her bare hands. She wasn't afraid of him. Or maybe she was, and she just didn't care anymore. "Leave it," Dante commanded. Elena paused, a piece of green glass in her hand. "Sir," I said, "leave it." Dante reached into the inner pocket of his ruined suit jacket. He pulled out a thick money clip. He didn't count the bills. He peeled off a stack that must have been $5,000 and dropped it onto the table she was standing next to. "For the staff," Dante said roughly. "For the trouble." He looked at her one last time. She was looking at the money, then back at him. There was no greed in her expression. Only a strange, sad curiosity. "Thank you, Elena," he muttered. Dante turned and stormed out of the obsidian room, the glass crunching beneath his Italian leather shoes. As he stepped out into the biting Chicago wind, he looked down at his hand. The white napkin was stark against his skin. It was the first time in a year anyone had tried to fix him instead of fearing him. Eleanor Vance waited until the heavy oak door slammed shut before she let out the breath she had been holding. Her knees buckled, and she had to grab the edge of a table to keep from collapsing into the pile of broken china. "Are you insane?" Marcus rushed over his face, flushed with a mix of relief and anger. He grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the mess. That was Dante Rossi Elena, the butcher of the South Side. He put a valet in a coma last month because the kid scratched his Bugatti. Do you have a death wish? Elena pulled her arm away gently. He was bleeding, Marcus. He's human. He's a monster, Marcus hissed. He looked at the stack of cash on the table. His eyes widened. He snatched it up, counting it quickly. Jesus. 5 grand. Split it among the buses and the kitchen staff, Elena said, bending down to resume cleaning. They were the most scared. Marcus looked at her like she was an alien. And you. You talked him down. You should take a cut. I don't want his money, Elena said quietly. I just want to finish my shift. But there was no finishing the shift. The restaurant was closed for the night. The police would have to be called to file a report for insurance, but everyone knew nothing would come of it. The Rossi family owned the insurance companies too. An hour later, Elena walked out of the back alley entrance of the restaurant. It was November in Chicago, and the wind off the lake cut through her thin coat like a knife. She pulled her scarf tighter, burying her face in the wool. She walked 3 blocks to the bus stop. She couldn't afford a heavy winter coat, not with the debts she was paying, not with the shadow hanging over her life. Her apartment was a tiny studio in a crumbling brick building in Rogers Park, miles away from the glitz of the Obsidian Room. It smelled of boiled cabbage and old cigarettes, a scent that seeped in from the neighbor's unit. As she unlocked her door, 3 deadbolts, always 3, she felt the exhaustion hit her. She kicked off her non-slip shoes and walked to the small kitchenette. On the counter sat a framed photograph. It showed a younger Elena, smiling, wearing nursing scrubs, her arm around a young man who looked just like her. I survived another day, Leo, she whispered to the photo. She opened the fridge. It was almost empty. Half a carton of milk, a few eggs, and a bottle of cheap insulin. Eleanor sat on her futon and rubbed her temples. She had been a top nursing student at Northwestern. She had a scholarship. She had a future. Then Leo had gotten involved with the wrong people, low-level runners for the Rossi family's rivals, the Moretti gang. Leo had gambled, lost money he didn't have, and then he had disappeared. The debt, however, didn't disappear. It fell to her. The Morettis had made it clear, pay Leo's debt or join him. She had dropped out of nursing school, taken 3 jobs, and disappeared into the anonymity of the service industry. She was a ghost, but tonight she had stepped into the light. She had touched Dante Rossi. She looked at her hands. She could still feel the heat of his skin. He was terrifying, yes. The rage radiating off him was palpable. But as a nurse, or almost a nurse, she knew what pain looked like. She recognized the look in his eyes. It wasn't the look of a killer. It was the look of a wounded animal caught in a trap, chewing its own leg off to escape. Why did I do that? She asked herself. Marcus is right. It was stupid. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Payment due in 48 hours. $2,000. Don't make us come visit. Elena dropped the phone onto the cushion. She closed her eyes. She had $400 in her bank account. Meanwhile, in a penthouse overlooking the Chicago River, Dante Rossi sat in the dark. The apartment was a masterpiece of modern architecture, glass walls, steel beams, minimalistic furniture that cost more than most houses. It was cold. It was empty. Dante sat on the leather sofa, a tumbler of whiskey in his left hand. His right hand was still wrapped in the white linen napkin. He hadn't taken it off. The door to the penthouse opened. Heavy footsteps echoed on the floor. I heard you made a scene, a gravelly voice said. Dante didn't turn around. He knew who it was. Vittorio Rossi, the Don, his father. Vittorio walked into the living room, leaning on his cane. He was an older version of Dante, but where Dante was fire and chaos, Vittorio was ice and granite. The obsidian room Dante, really. Vittorio sighed, pouring himself a drink without asking. I have a meeting with the alderman there next week. Now I have to pay double to have the place renovated before then. Send me the bill, Dante said flatly. I don't want your money, Dante. I want your head in the game, Vittorio snapped. The Moretti family is moving in on the shipping yards. We are losing territory, and my heir is busy throwing tantrums in steakhouses because he misses his mommy. Dante's grip on the whiskey glass tightened until his knuckles turned white under the bandage. Don't talk about her. She's been dead a year, Vittorio said, his voice devoid of emotion. Get over it. You are a Rossi. Weakness is not a luxury you can afford. Vittorio noticed the white cloth on Dante's hand. What is that? Dante looked down at the napkin. The knot was precise, a square knot, the kind medical professionals used. Nothing, Dante said. Take it off. You look like a cripple, Vittorio sneered. Fix yourself, Dante. Tomorrow night, I'm hosting a dinner at the Obsidian Room to show the city we are still in control. You will be there. You will be charming. And you will not break a single glass. Do you understand? I understand, Dante said. Vittorio finished his drink and left without saying goodbye. Dante sat alone in the dark again. He looked at the bandage. He pulled the end of the knot, loosening it. The fabric fell away, revealing the cut. It had stopped bleeding just as she said it would. He picked up the napkin. It was a standard restaurant linen, but in the corner, embroidered in small gold thread, was the logo of the restaurant. And there was something else. A faint smell. Vanilla and rubbing alcohol. Dante brought the cloth to his nose and inhaled. It was the only thing in this cold steel penthouse that felt real. He took his phone out and dialed his personal driver and fixer, a man named Silas. Silas, Dante said. Boss, Silas answered on the first ring. I need a name, Dante said. The waitress working the floor at the Obsidian Room tonight. Small, brown hair, green eyes. Find out who she is. Consider it done. You want me to scare her? Pay her off for silence. No, Dante said, staring at the lights of the city reflected in the glass. I just want to know where she lives. The next morning, Chicago was grey. A relentless, freezing drizzle coated the sidewalks in a slick sheen of ice. For Elena Vance, the weather matched the knot of dread tightening in her stomach. She had slept for 3 hours. The text message from the loan shark payment due in 48 hours was burned into her retina. $2,000. It might as well have been $2 million. Eleanor stood inside Goldman's Exchange, a pawn shop on the corner of Clark Street that smelled of stale cigar smoke and desperation. She placed a small velvet box on the scratched glass counter. Inside was a gold locket shaped like a heart with a tiny chipped diamond in the center. It was the only thing her mother had left her. The broker, a man with yellowing eyes and fingers stained with ink, picked it up with a jeweler's loupe. He turned it over, sighing theatrically. It's 10-carat, sweetheart. The gold is thin. And the diamond, it's industrial grade. Dust, basically. It's an antique, Elena said, her voice tight. It's from 1950. It's old, the broker corrected. There's a difference. He tossed the locket onto a digital scale. $75, scrap value. Elena felt the tears prickling her eyes. I need at least 500. Please, it's all I have. The man shrugged already, pushing the box back toward her. I'm running a business, not a charity. Take it or leave it. Elena took the locket. She walked out into the rain, clutching the velvet box so hard her fingernails dug into her palm. $75 wouldn't even cover the interest on Leo's debt for the week. She spent the rest of the day in a haze of panic. She called the temp agency, but there were no shifts available. She considered selling her plasma, but she was anemic. They would turn her away at the screening. By the time evening fell, the shadows stretching long across the pavement, Elena knew she was out of options. She was walking back to her apartment, taking the shortcut through an alleyway near the L train tracks. It was a mistake. She knew it was a mistake as soon as she turned the corner. 3 men were leaning against the brick wall, the embers of their cigarettes glowing in the twilight. They weren't random thugs. They wore leather jackets with the collars turned up, and they moved with the predatory confidence of men who knew the police wouldn't touch them. "Elena!" A voice purred. Elena froze. Stepping out from the shadows was Luca Moretti. He was the nephew of the Moretti family, a man known for his perfectly manicured hands and his absolute lack of empathy. He had been the one who lured her brother Leo into the gambling ring. "Luca," Elena said, backing up. Her heel caught on a loose cobblestone, but she kept her balance. "I have the money. I just need 1 more day to transfer it." Luca laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. He flicked his cigarette onto the wet ground and crushed it with the toe of his expensive boot. "You're a terrible liar, Elena. It's one of the things I like about you. You're transparent." He took a step toward her. The other 2 men flanked him, cutting off her escape route. "Leo was a liar. He was good at it. But you wear your panic like a cheap perfume." "I'll get it," Elena pleaded. "Please, just don't hurt me." "Hurt you?" Luca tilted his head. "We aren't going to hurt you, Bellissima. We're businessmen. If you can't pay with cash, we find other ways to settle the ledger." He reached out and stroked her cheek with the back of his hand. His skin was cold. Elena flinched, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "You were a nurse, right?" Luca mused. "We have a private clinic for our associates who can't go to the ER. We need someone to stitch up bullet holes and keep their mouth shut. You come work for us, live in the compound, and maybe over a few years, you work off Leo's debt." "No," Elena whispered. She knew what that meant. Being a nurse for the Morettis meant being a prisoner. It meant she would never leave. "It wasn't a request," Luca snapped. He grabbed her wrist. His grip was like iron. "You're coming with us. Now!" Elena screamed. She tried to twist away, scratching at his face, but he just laughed. One of the other men grabbed her other arm. They were dragging her toward a black sedan parked at the end of the alley. "Help!" she shrieked, though she knew the alley was deserted. "Somebody help me!" "Shut her up," Luca ordered. The second man raised a hand to strike her. Elena squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the impact. Screech! The sound of tires locking up on asphalt echoed through the alley. High beams flooded the narrow space, blindingly bright white light cutting through the gloom. A massive, matte black Range Rover had pulled into the mouth of the alley, blocking the exit. The engine roared, a deep, guttural sound of pure horsepower. "What the hell?" Luca squinted, shielding his eyes. The driver's door opened. A figure stepped out into the rain. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply walked toward them with a terrifying, rhythmic purpose. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his silhouette imposing against the headlights. He wore a long charcoal wool coat, the collar turned up. As he got closer, the light caught the side of his face, the sharp jawline, the grey eyes that looked like a winter storm. It was Dante Rossi. Luca Moretti dropped Elena's arm as if it were burning hot. The rivalry between the Rossi and Moretti families was written in blood on the streets of Chicago. They were currently in a ceasefire, but it was fragile as glass. "Rossi!" Luca said, his voice losing its arrogant edge. He took a step back, his hand drifting toward his waistband where a gun was undoubtedly tucked. "This is Moretti business. Walk away." Dante didn't stop until he was 3 feet from them. He towered over Luca. He didn't look at the gun. He didn't look at the other 2 men. He looked straight at Eleanor. She was trembling, pressed against the wet brick wall, rain plastering her hair to her face. She looked terrified, but when her eyes met Dante's, something shifted, a flicker of recognition. "She doesn't look like business, Luca," Dante said. His voice was calm, almost bored, which made it infinitely more menacing. "She looks like a woman being assaulted in an alley." "She owes us," Luca spat. "Her brother was a thief. The debt is hers." Dante finally looked at Luca. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "How much?" Luca blinked. "What?" "The debt," Dante said. "How much is it?" 50 grand. Luca lied. It was actually 20, but he was greedy. Dante reached into his coat pocket. The Moretti goons tensed hands, flying to their weapons. But Dante only pulled out a checkbook and a fountain pen. He didn't even use a surface to write on. He held the book against his palm, scribbling quickly. He ripped the check out and let it flutter to the wet ground at Luca's feet. 50,000, Dante said. "Now she's mine." Luca looked down at the check, then back at Dante. He was furious, humiliated, but he wasn't stupid. Starting a war with the Rossi heir over a waitress wasn't worth it. Not tonight. Luca signaled his men. They backed away. "You're paying too much for a stray dog, Dante." Luca sneered. "But fine, the debt is cleared. But tell your father, the shipping yards are still open season." Luca looked at Elena one last time, a look that promised this wasn't over, and got into his sedan. The car sped off, leaving them in the silence of the rain. Dante stood there, watching the taillights fade. Then he turned to Elena. She was frozen, staring at him. She was soaked to the bone, shivering violently. "Get in the car," Dante said. Elena's teeth chattered. "You paid... Why did you..." "I said get in the car." Dante repeated his voice, leaving no room for argument. "Unless you want me to call Luca back to give you a ride." Elena looked at the empty alley, then at the towering man who had just bought her life for the price of a luxury car. She realized with a sinking heart that she had just traded a wolf for a lion. She walked to the Range Rover and climbed inside. The interior of the Range Rover was a different world. It was warm, silent, and smelled of expensive leather and Dante's cologne, sandalwood, and tobacco. The noise of the city was completely cut off by the bulletproof glass. Dante got in the driver's seat. He didn't look at her. He put the car in gear and drove. Elena sat hugging herself, trying to stop shaking. The heat from the vents hit her face, stinging her cold skin. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small. "My place," Dante said. "I need to go home," Elena said, a spark of defiance returning. "I have to." "You have to what?" Dante glanced at her, his eyes sharp in the reflection of the rearview mirror. "Go back to that rat hole in Rogers Park." "Luca knows where you live, Elena. If I drop you off there, he'll be back in an hour to collect interest on the debt I just paid. Do you think a check makes a man like that stop?" Elena fell silent. He was right. She knew he was right. She was homeless now, effectively. "Why?" she asked after a long pause. "Why did you do that? You don't even know me." "I know you wrapped my hand when everyone else was running away," Dante said quietly. He lifted his right hand off the steering wheel for a second. The bandage she had applied was gone, replaced by a sleek black compression glove. "And I know you're a nurse." "I was a nursing student," she corrected. "I didn't finish." "Close enough." They drove in silence, until they reached a private underground garage in the heart of downtown. They took a dedicated elevator up 50 floors. When the doors opened, Elena stepped into the penthouse she had only imagined in movies. It was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire Chicago skyline. The city lights twinkled like diamonds below, but inside the apartment was stark, minimalist, cold. There were no photos on the walls, no personal touches. It looked like a showroom or a fortress. "Coat," Dante said, holding out a hand. Elena took off her sodden wool coat. He took it and tossed it onto a chair, not caring about the water dripping onto the hardwood. "Sit." He pointed to the kitchen island. Elena sat on a high leather stool. She felt incredibly small in the massive room. Dante walked to the fridge, pulled out a bottle of water, and slid it across the counter to her. Then he pulled out a first aid kit from a drawer, a professional trauma kit, not a drugstore box. He placed it in front of her. Then he sat down opposite her and began to peel off the black glove. Elena gasped. The hand she had treated yesterday was worse, much worse. The cut across his knuckles was angry and red, the edges swollen. But it wasn't just the cut. His hand was trembling, fine, rhythmic tremors that he was trying to hide by clenching his fist. "It's infected," Elena said instinctively. Her medical training kicked in, overriding her fear. She reached out but stopped herself. "May I?" Dante nodded. She took his hand. It was fever hot. "You didn't go to a doctor." "I told you, I don't do doctors," Dante gritted out. "Questions get asked. Police reports get filed. I don't have time for it." "This needs antibiotics," Elena said, examining the wound. "Oral and topical. If the infection spreads to the tendon, you could lose mobility in your fingers, or lose the hand entirely." "I have antibiotics," Dante said. He kicked a cabinet door open with his foot. Inside were rows of prescription bottles. Painkillers, antibiotics, sleeping pills. It looked like a pharmacy. "Pick what you need," he said. "Fix it." Elena looked at the stash, then back at him. "You're buying me to be your nurse," Dante laughed darkly. "I'm not buying you, Elena. I bought your debt. That means you owe me now. $50,000. He leaned forward, his face inches from hers. She could see the flecks of gold in his grey eyes, and the exhaustion etched into the lines around them. "You can't pay me back in cash. We both know that, so you're going to work it off." "Doing what?" she whispered. "This," he gestured to his hand. "And everything else. My father expects me to be the perfect heir. Strong, unbreakable, but—" He looked away, his jaw tightening. "Since the accident, things have been difficult. I don't sleep. I have tremors. My temper is—" "Explosive," Elena supplied. "Unpredictable," he corrected. "I need someone here. Someone who knows how to handle injuries without calling 911. Someone who can make sure I'm functional, and someone who isn't on my father's payroll." "Why trust me?" Elena asked. "I'm a stranger." "Because you have nowhere else to go," Dante said brutally. "And because you looked Luca Moretti in the eye and didn't beg. You were scared, but you held your ground. I need that." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city that he was supposed to rule one day. "You'll live here, in the guest wing. You'll be available 24/7. You manage my medications, you dress my wounds, and you ensure I show up to events looking like I'm not falling apart. In exchange, you get a roof over your head, food and protection. Luca won't touch you while you're under my roof." Elena looked at his back. She looked at the expensive apartment that felt like a prison cell made of glass. She thought about the alleyway. She thought about Leo, who had run away and left her with this mess. She had no choice. but she had dignity. "I have conditions," she said. Dante turned around, eyebrows raised. "You're in no position to negotiate, sweetheart." "I'm not a servant," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I'm a medical professional. If I do this, you listen to me. If I say you need to sleep, you sleep. If I say you can't drink on these meds, you don't drink. I won't be responsible for you dying because you're too stubborn to follow orders." Dante stared at her for a long moment. The silence stretched heavy and tense, and Elena held her breath. Then the corner of Dante's mouth twitched upward. It wasn't a smile exactly, but it was close. "Fine," he said. "You're the boss of my health. I'm the boss of everything else." He walked back to the counter and extended his damaged hand to her. "Deal." Elena looked at the hand that had destroyed a restaurant yesterday and saved her life today. She reached out and took it. "Deal," she said. As she began to clean the wound with betadine, Dante hissed in pain, but didn't pull away. "There's one more thing," Dante said, watching her work. "What?" "Tomorrow night, the Rossi family dinner. It's at the Obsidian Room, the place I wrecked." "I remember," Elena said dryly. "You're coming with me?" Elena froze, the gauze hovering over his skin. "What, no? I'm a waitress there. They know me. Marcus knows me." "Exactly," Dante said. A cruel, calculated light entered his eyes. "My father wants me to apologize, to show humility. Instead, I'm going to walk in there with the waitress who cleaned up my mess, wearing a dress that costs more than Marcus makes in a year. I'm going to show them that I don't apologize. I rewrite the narrative." "I'm not a prop, Dante," Elena said angrily. "For tomorrow night you are," Dante said. "You're my personal health consultant. It's a legitimate role, but you'll look like a queen. It will drive my father insane. And if I refuse, then you can take your coat and walk back to Rogers Park," Dante said simply. Elena looked down at his hand. She finished taping the bandage. She cut the tape with a snap. "I'll need a dress," she said. Dante pulled his phone out. "Silas is already bringing a stylist. Try to get some sleep, Elena. Tomorrow, you enter the lion's den." Elena watched him walk away toward his bedroom. She was safe from the Morettis, yes. But as she looked around the silent, imposing penthouse, she realized she was trapped in a much more dangerous game. She was now the property of Dante Rossi, a man who was fighting a war with the world and seemingly with himself, and she was standing right in the crossfire. The dress arrived in a black box the size of a coffin. Elena stared at it, lying on the bed in the guest suite. It was silk the color of deep emeralds, suspended by straps as thin as spiderwebs. It was backless, designed to cling to every curve with a slit that ran dangerously high up the thigh. "It's too much," Elena whispered, touching the cool fabric. "It's armor," a voice said from the doorway. Dante was leaning against the frame, dressed in a tuxedo that was tailored to perfection. The black fabric absorbed the light, making his pale skin and sharp features stand out even more. He looked like a prince from a dark fairy tale, beautiful, but undeniably dangerous. "You are entering a battlefield tonight, Elena," Dante said, walking into the room. He placed a small velvet box on the dresser. "My father, his associates, the politicians they own. They smell fear. If you walk in there looking like a victim, they will eat you alive. If you walk in looking like you own the place, they will hesitate." Elena opened the velvet box. Inside were diamond earrings, real ones. "I can't wear these," she said. "They aren't a gift. They are part of the uniform," Dante said, his voice flat. But as he looked at her, his gaze softened slightly. "Silas is waiting downstairs with the car. You have 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, Elena looked in the mirror and didn't recognize herself. The stylist Silas had hired had pulled her hair back into a sleek, sophisticated chignon, exposing the curve of her neck. The makeup was subtle but sharp, accentuating her green eyes. The dress fit like a second skin. She looked powerful. She looked expensive. She looked like she belonged in the penthouse. When she walked out to the elevator, Dante stopped checking his watch. He went still. His eyes swept over her, starting from the heels and moving up to her eyes. For a moment, the cold mask he wore slipped, revealing raw, unguarded admiration. "Well," Elena asked, feeling self-conscious under his intensity, "do I pass inspection?" Dante cleared his throat, adjusting his cufflinks. "You'll do." The ride to the obsidian room was silent, but the air in the car was charged with electricity. When the Range Rover pulled up to the curb, the paparazzi were already there. Cameras flashed like lightning storms. Dante stepped out first. The crowd erupted. "Dante, Mr. Rossi over here." He ignored them, walking around the car to open her door. He held out his hand, the one she had bandaged. He was wearing the black compression glove again, but tonight it looked like a fashion statement, not a medical necessity. Elena took his hand. As she stepped out, the flashes intensified. "Head up," Dante murmured, close to her ear. "Look at them like they're dirt." Elena raised her chin. She channeled every ounce of anger she had felt over the last year at Leo, at the loan sharks, at the world that had tried to crush her. She didn't smile. She stared down the lens of the nearest camera with icy indifference. They walked through the heavy oak doors of the obsidian room. The restaurant had been miraculously repaired. The glass was new, the tables reset. The scent of expensive wine and truffles filled the air. Marcus, the manager, was standing at the host podium looking nervous. When he saw Dante, he paled. When he saw the woman on Dante's arm, he froze. "Good evening, Marcus," Dante said smoothly. Marcus's mouth opened and closed like a fish. He looked at Elena, his former employee, who had been scrubbing floors 2 days ago, now dripping in diamonds, and holding the arm of the city's most feared man. "Hey, Elena," Marcus squeaked. "It's Miss Vance tonight. Marcus." Dante corrected him, his voice low and threatening. "Our table, the private alcove near the kitchen. The one I cleared on Tuesday." "Of course, Mr. Rossi. Right this way." As they walked through the dining room, silence fell over the tables. Everyone watched them. Elena felt their eyes judging, assessing. She squeezed Dante's arm. He squeezed back his grip, grounding her. They reached the large round table in the back. Vittorio Rossi was already seated. Beside him sat 2 other men. Councilman Miller, a corrupt politician, and a man Elena didn't recognize, a heavy-set man with a scar running through his eyebrow. Vittorio didn't stand up. He sipped his wine, his eyes narrowing as they landed on Elena. "You're late," Vittorio said. "Traffic," Dante replied, pulling out a chair for Elena. "And you brought company," Vittorio said, his tone dripping with disdain. "I wasn't aware we were hiring escorts for family dinners now, Dante." The table went silent. The insult was sharp and deliberate. Elena felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could speak, Dante laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. "Careful, Father. Ms. Vance is my personal medical consultant. She's currently overseeing my rehabilitation regimen. I wouldn't want you to offend the woman who decides if I'm fit to run the family business." Vittorio raised an eyebrow. "A nurse. You brought a nurse to a negotiation." "I brought the person who keeps me alive," Dante said, sitting down, "which is more than I can say for anyone else at this table." The dinner was an exercise in torture. The men discussed territory bribes and union busting as if they were discussing the weather. Elena sat silently eating her risotto, observing. She watched Dante. He was drinking water, not wine. He was calm on the surface, but Elena sat close enough to see the tension in his jaw. She saw the way his hand, the damaged one resting on his knee under the table, was starting to tremor again. The stress was triggering his neurological symptoms. Vittorio noticed it too. "You're shaking, Dante," Vittorio said loudly, interrupting the councilman. "Look at him. Can't even hold a fork steady. And you think you're ready to take over the North Side operations?" The heavyset man with the scar chuckled. "Maybe the boy needs a vacation, Vito. He's fragile." Dante's eyes went black. He reached for his water glass, but his hand spasmed. The glass tipped, spilling water onto the white tablecloth. "Pathetic," Vittorio spat. Dante looked like he was about to snap. The vein in his forehead pulsed. He was sliding back into that dark, violent place that had destroyed the restaurant 2 nights ago. Elena acted on instinct. She didn't make a scene. She simply reached under the table and placed her hand firmly on Dante's knee. She applied deep pressure, a grounding technique used for panic attacks. "Breathe," she whispered so low only he could hear. At the same time, she picked up her own napkin and casually dabbed the spilled water. "My apologies, gentlemen," Elena said, her voice clear and authoritative. She looked directly at the heavyset man. "Mr. Rossi has been undergoing intensive physical therapy for a nerve injury sustained while defending family interests. The tremors are a sign of muscle fatigue from overworking, not weakness. In medicine, we call it a hypertrophy response. It actually means he's getting stronger." She lied seamlessly, using medical jargon to confuse them. The table went quiet. The heavyset man looked confused. Vittorio looked at Elena with a new expression, suspicion mixed with a grudging respect. "Is that so?" Vittorio asked. "Yes," Elena said. She turned to Dante, her hand still gripping his knee, anchoring him. She smiled a warm, intimate smile that reached her eyes. "You've pushed yourself too hard today, Dante. We should schedule a massage for the scar tissue later." It was an intimate, almost scandalous comment. It implied a relationship that went far beyond nurse and patient. Dante stared at her. The rage in his eyes receded, replaced by shock. She had just saved him from humiliation. She had taken the weapon out of his father's hand and turned it into a shield. He covered her hand on his knee with his own. "You're right," Dante said to her, ignoring his father completely. "I'll take your advice." For the rest of the dinner, Vittorio didn't attack Dante again. He spent the time watching Elena trying to figure out the puzzle of the waitress who spoke like a doctor and looked like a queen. When the check came, Dante stood up. "We're leaving," he announced. "My consultant says I need rest." As they walked out, passing the stunned staff and the envious patrons, Dante didn't let go of her hand. Once they were back in the safety of the Range Rover, the doors locked and the world shut out, Dante slumped back against the leather seat. He let out a long, shaky breath. "You lied to the Don of Chicago," Dante said, looking at the ceiling. "I improvised," Elena said, her heart still racing. Dante turned his head to look at her. The streetlights flickered over his face. "Hypertrophy response." "It sounded better than he's having a panic attack," Elena shrugged. Dante reached out and touched a loose strand of hair that had fallen near her cheek. His fingers were gentle. "You were perfect," he whispered. "Thank you." Elena felt a jolt go through her at his touch. It wasn't fear this time. It was something else, something dangerous. "I'm just doing my job, Dante," she said softly. "Are you?" Dante asked. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back up to her eyes. Because it felt like more than a job back there. The car turned a corner, sharply braking the moment. But the air between them had shifted. The line between employer and employee had been blurred, and neither of them knew how to draw it back. 3 days passed, and the penthouse ceased to be a tomb. Under Elena's care, Dante's hand healed, but more importantly, the silence between them changed. It wasn't hostile anymore. It was companionable. Over shared meals, Dante confessed secrets he had never told a living soul, that he played the piano, that he once wanted to be an architect, not a crime boss. "Rosses don't build houses," he told her one snowy evening in the kitchen. "We burn them down." "You're rebuilding yourself right now," Elena replied. The air shifted. Dante stepped closer, trapping her against the counter. The exhaustion in his eyes was replaced by a raw, magnetic hunger. "I'm not rebuilding," he murmured, his hands resting on her waist. "You are." He kissed her. It wasn't the kiss of a tyrant, but of a drowning man finding air. Elena kissed him back, losing herself in the moment, forgetting the debt and the danger. But as Dante pulled back, his face went grey. He gripped his stomach, groaning in agony. Burning. He collapsed to the floor, his body seizing violently. Elena went into instant triage mode. She grabbed his water glass and smelled a faint chemical residue. Poison. "Silas!" she screamed, hitting the panic button. Dante's airway was closing. She needed to bind the toxin immediately. She frantically threw bread into the toaster, burning it until it was pure carbon. She crushed the char into water and milk of magnesia, forcing the black sludge down Dante's throat, just as Silas burst in with the guards. "He's been poisoned!" Elena shouted, covered in soot and sweat. "Get the car." 2 hours later, in the private wing of St. Luke's Hospital, Silas confirmed that Elena's quick thinking had saved Dante's life. But the news brought a darker realization. The poison had been in the penthouse water supply. Only 3 people had keys: Silas, Elena, and Dante's father, Vittorio. Vittorio had tried to kill his own son to frame the Morettis and start a war. When Eleanor entered Dante's hospital room, he was awake, but the warmth was gone from his eyes. He looked at her with a terrifying coldness. "You saved me," he rasped, "but I need to know if I can trust you." He threw a manila folder onto the bed. "Silas ran a background check on the driver who killed my mother, the hit-and-run driver who fled the scene." Dante flipped the file open to reveal a mugshot. It was Leo, Elena's brother. "Your brother killed my mother," Dante said, his voice cracking with betrayed fury. "Did you know?" "No," Elena whispered, the room spinning. "I swear I didn't know." "Liar!" Dante roared, ripping the IV from his arm. "He killed her, and you played me. The monster was back. The connection they had built in the kitchen was shattered. Get out!" Dante commanded, pointing at the door. "Run, Elena. Run far away. Because if I see you again, I will destroy you." Heartbroken and terrified, Elena fled the hospital into the freezing Chicago night. She had saved his life, but the truth about her brother had just signed her death warrant. Elena Vance didn't run to another state. She stayed in the shadows of Chicago, driven by a gnawing suspicion. Dante had claimed her brother killed his mother, but Leo, a coward who fainted at the sight of blood, was no killer. She had to know the truth. It took 4 days to track Leo down to a basement in Little Italy. When she kicked the door in, he was a shivering wreck. Under her furious interrogation, Leo broke. He admitted to driving the car that night, but he hadn't done it alone. He had been hired to cause a fender bender to scare Dante's mother. The man who hired him was an older man with a silver-handled cane, Vittorio Rossi. The horror washed over Elena. Vittorio had orchestrated the hit on his own wife to remove the softness from Dante and mold him into a ruthless heir. He had framed the Morettis and used Leo as a pawn. Elena dragged a terrified Leo out of the basement. They were going to the obsidian room. Inside the restaurant, Vittorio Rossi was holding court with the heads of the 5 families. Dante sat at his right hand, a hollow shell of a man, believing he had been betrayed by the woman he loved. Just as Vittorio raised a toast to the end of the Moretti family, the doors banged open. Elena marched in, shoving Leo ahead of her. The room went silent. "I told you to run," Dante said, standing up, his hand hovering over his waistband. "I ran to find the truth," Elena shouted. She pushed Leo forward. "Tell him, Leo. Tell him about the man with the cane." Trembling, Leo pointed a finger at the head of the table. "It was him. He gave me the keys. He told me to shut her up because she was talking to the feds." Vittorio scoffed, his face a mask of stone. "The junkie is lying. It's a setup." "My mother wasn't talking to the feds," Dante said, his voice barely a whisper. He turned slowly toward his father. "She was talking to a divorce lawyer. She was going to leave you." Vittorio's eyes widened. In his arrogance, he had slipped. "It's the same thing she was making you weak, Dante. I did it for you. I forged you in fire to make you a king." The confession hung in the air. Dante's grief evaporated, replaced by a cold, terrifying resolve. "You made me an orphan." Vittorio, realizing he had lost, moved with shocking speed. He drew a revolver and leveled it at Elena. "You ruined everything. Bang!" Elena flinched, but she didn't fall. Vittorio did. Dante stood with his arm extended, smoke curling from his pistol. He had drawn and fired in a split second, striking his father in the shoulder and disarming him. "Good shot!" Vittorio wheezed from the floor. "Just like I taught you." "I didn't aim for the heart," Dante said coldly. He turned to the security guards. "Call the police." It was the ultimate rejection of the Mafia code. Dante was done with the silence. He turned to Leo, who was cowering. "You will confess everything to the authorities. You will go to prison. That is your mercy." Then Dante looked at Elena. The adrenaline faded, leaving him shaking. "You came back," he whispered. "I promised to take care of you," Elena said, stepping over the broken glass to hold him. "That includes cutting out the cancer." The architect, 6 months later. The obsidian room was gone. In its place stood the greenhouse, a bright, airy restaurant co-owned by Elena. She walked to the back table where Dante sat. He wasn't wearing a suit, but a soft sweater. On the table lay blueprints for a community center in Rogers Park. "It's solid," Dante said, smiling a real smile that reached his eyes. "No secrets in the foundation. Leo called from prison," Elena said, resting her hand on his shoulder. "He's doing well." Dante nodded, covering her hand with his. The tremors were gone. The anger was gone. He pulled Elena onto his lap, not caring who saw. "I love you, Elena." "I love you too, Dante." They kissed in the sunlight, the ghosts of the past, finally laid to rest. The storm had passed, and in the silence that followed, they had built a home. And that is the story of Dante and Elena. It shows us that even in the darkest hearts, there is room for light, and that sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is not to fight, but to heal. Dante Rossi spent his life breaking things, believing he was broken, until a waitress showed him that broken things can be mended with patience and kindness. He learned that true power isn't about how much fear you can instill, but how much truth you can endure. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a big thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share it with a friend who loves a dramatic romance, and hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We have plenty more tales of love, revenge, and redemption coming your way. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.